Do you know what it means to feel a house breathe? Not with life, but with hunger. The Bertram plantation in Virginia was such a place. Its silence was not empty. It pressed against the ribs like iron bands, a silence that carried the weight of centuries and sins. And in the winter of 1841, on a night when the world celebrated light, birth, and salvation, that silence was set aflame by the hands of a woman who was never meant to be remembered. Her name was Sarah, the slave who became the executioner, the daughter who became the curse, the sister who burned her family alive. But don't imagine her as a wild, screaming figure with torches in her hands. No, Sarah was quiet. She had been quiet her whole life. A child stolen, branded, raised inside walls where her blood was shackled to men who denied her humanity, yet used her body all the same. By the age of 9, she was already half shadow, a girl who learned that tears were useless currency in a house ruled by cruelty. By 13, she was made caretaker of the Bertram children, boys who were her blood, though the word brother was forbidden to her tongue. William and Jonathan. She fed them, cradled them, sang them lullabies she barely remembered from the mother stolen from her arms. But they were not hers. They would never be hers. They grew not into sons, nor brothers, but into wolves wearing the silk of gentlemen. Their father, Augustus Bertram, was the true architect of the house's rot, a man carved of bone and command who measured worth only in obedience and pain. His boots were sermons, his silence a noose. He had no need for tenderness, only power. And in that household, power was the only gospel, enforced with lash and fear, spoken in bruises, carved into flesh. Sarah became their shadow, present but unseen, moving like breath through cracks in the wood. But her silence was not emptiness. It was gathering, ning, becoming something sharper, colder, until the walls themselves seemed to lean closer whenever she passed. You see, there are houses that grow sick, and when sickness festers long enough, the cure is not healing, it is fire. By her 22nd year, Sarah had become something the Bertrams did not understand. She was no longer a servant, not fully, not even a woman in the way they measured women. She had become a mirror, a shadow, a presence that absorbed everything and revealed nothing. The other slaves whispered that she walked lighter than the rest, as if the ground itself feared to betray her steps. Her eyes no longer wept, her hands no longer trembled, but inside her silence, something was sharpening. The twins, William and Jonathan, had grown into men with posture stiff as oak and tempers that reeked of their father's rot. William, broad-shouldered and impatient, ruled with fists and barked commands as though cruelty were proof of birthright. Jonathan, the quieter one, was worse. His stillness was not wisdom, it was study. He watched the suffering of others with a fascination that unsettled even his brother. When Elias, a boy of 12, was caught stealing molasses, William demanded punishment, 37 lashes. Jonathan did not watch the lash fall. He recorded it, carefully, in a small leather book, blood as ink, pain as history. Sarah stood there, silent as the whip cracked, her face unreadable. But something deep within her shifted. That night, she lay awake listening to the house, hearing not wood and wind, but whispers in the walls, groans too old to belong to the living. She knew then, the Bertram house was no home. It was a wound, and wounds, left untended, do not simply bleed. They fester, rot, and demand release. Then came the truth she had always known but never dared to speak. Old Mabel, the cook, drew her aside one evening, her voice low and trembling. "He's your father, Sarah. You knew it. You just didn't want the words." The truth was not revelation. It was confirmation. She had always known by the way Augustus's gaze lingered, known by the marks on her seam, kin that no other slave bore. William and Jonathan were not just her charges, they were her blood, her brothers, and that knowledge did not free her. It bound her tighter, a chain forged of blood and silence. But in that chain lay clarity. Nothing in the Bertram house had ever been born of love, only possession, only legacy. And legacy is not sacred, legacy can burn. By the winter of 1841, the Bertram estate was already unraveling. The fields grew quieter, not with peace, but with despair so heavy even the birds abandoned the trees. The house groaned at night, not with wind, but with memory. The portraits on the walls seemed to lean forward, their painted eyes following Sarah's movements. And the mirrors, those cruel, polished mirrors, began to feel like watchmen, reflecting back not her face, but something older, something waiting. The annual Christmas gathering approached, and the halls filled with false laughter, polished silver, and the brittle glamour of a family desperate to appear whole. William paced the corridors like a caged hound. Jonathan scribbled in his endless journals, his quill scratching like an insect against the silence. Augustus sat in his study, a king enthroned in his rot, content to let fear do his speaking. And Sarah, silent, precise, moved through it all like a shadow rehearsing for a role no one else could see. Her hands peeled apples, lit candles, folded linens, but her mind was elsewhere. She was listening, always listening. It was 2 nights before Christmas when she found Emily, the new girl, no more than 16, curled behind the stable. Her apron torn, her voice gone, her eyes wide and broken. Sarah wrapped her in a blanket, pressed a cloth to her skin, and said nothing. There were no words left in that house worth speaking. Only fire could speak now. The next morning, Sarah went to the pantry. Behind jars of preserved peaches lay a cedar box no one but she remembered. Inside, 3 handmade dolls, one with red thread hair, one with a blue ribbon around its neck, the third faceless, relics of a childhood stolen, mended with ash and blood. She laid them out upon the table, wrapped them in linen marked by old stains. When Mabel entered and saw, her lips trembled. "You still remember," she whispered. "I remember everything," Sarah replied. That night she opened the attic window. Snow fell thick and silent, muffling the earth. She lit a single match and held it until the flame burned her skin. She did not cry, she only breathed. For she knew what the house demanded. The Bertram estate was not merely a dwelling. It was a wound, and wounds do not close. They must be cauterized. Christmas Eve arrived beneath a sky the color of iron. Snow fell heavy, cloaking the earth in a shroud. Inside the Bertram house, candles glittered against polished glass, and guests tried to laugh above the storm. But the walls were groaning now, old timbers bending like ribs under invisible weight. Augustus drank in silence. William barked at servants. Jonathan wrote in his ledger even as music played. They did not notice Sarah moving like smoke among them. They never had. When the last guest retired to a spare room and the house sank into uneasy quiet, Sarah began. First, the dining hall. She cleared the plates, but left the candles burning, their flames thin and hungry. Then the parlor. She adjusted curtains, opened the chimney flue wide, and laid down trails of oil with careful hands. From cellar to attic she moved, carrying the half-empty cans of lamp oil, spreading them like veins across the house. She worked not in haste, but in ceremony. This was not rebellion. It was ritual. In the drawing room, she placed the 3 dolls upon the mantel. Red hair, blue ribbon, faceless. She circled them with a thin line of salt taken from the kitchens. The house seemed to lean into her movements, the air heavy, the silence no longer waiting, but holding its breath. At the top of the main stairwell, she paused. The house stretched before her, portraits, corridors, the weight of centuries. She whispered a single word. Not in English, not in the tongue of her masters. It was the name her mother once called her, a name forbidden, swallowed by years of servitude. Speaking it aloud was resurrection. Speaking it aloud was defiance. And here, viewer, this is where you must join the ritual. If you have followed this descent this far, leave a mark upon it. Comment the words, I carry the fire below. Twice. Once for the silence that made you. Once for the fire that will unmake you. For two, his is not merely Sarah's story. It is the inheritance of anyone who learns the truth too late. Downstairs, the oil pooled black and glistening. The dolls stared outward with empty eyes. Sarah held a burning rag between her fingers, steady, unwavering. Fire does not ask permission. It claims. The first flames caught in the dining hall, thin at first, a whisper against the tablecloth, then widening, stretching upward until the portraits blistered and curled. The fire moved quickly, as though it had always been waiting, as though Sarah's hand had only released what the house itself hungered for. From the cellar to the rafters, smoke rose in spirals, beams crackled, curtains twisted in heat. The dolls upon the mantel fell one by one, their linen skins igniting in silence, red thread hair consumed, blue ribbon curling into ash, the faceless one burning last, holding its shape a moment longer than the others, as though reluctant to leave. William woke first. His shouts thundered through the hall, fists pounding on locked doors. "Who did this?" His voice drowned beneath the roar of fire. Jonathan emerged from his chamber, clutching his journal, coughing, his pale face streaked with soot. Even then, even with flames at his back, he scribbled, documenting ruin, cataloging horror. His last record. Augustus staggered from his study, bottle still in hand, his robe aflame before he understood. He fell to his knees at the threshold of the great hall, choking, his empire of cruelty collapsing around him. The master of the house was no master at all, only tinder. Sarah moved through the blaze with calm precision. The fire parted around her as if it knew her name. She guided Emily and two others through the servants' passage, pressing damp cloths to their mouths. "Breathe slow," she whispered. Her voice was steady. She had not spoken so steadily in years. Behind them, timbers groaned like dying beasts. A chandelier tore free and crashed to the floor, scattering fire in golden shards. William tried to chase them, coughing, screaming her name, not with recognition, not with kinship, but with rage. A brother who never knew he was a brother. He vanished into smoke before his words reached her. The air outside was sharp and freezing, the snow falling heavier, hissing when it touched the flames that leapt from the roof. The Bertram estate, its legacy, its wealth, its rot, was collapsing in a single night. Sarah did not watch it fall as the others did. She turned her back to the blaze, for the fire was not an ending. It was a door. By morning, the Bertram estate was a blackened skeleton against the snow. The great pillars, once white, now stood charred and split. Smoke coiled upward like the final prayers of a congregation that never believed. The air reeked of wet ash and burned silk. Nothing of the grandeur remained, only ruin, raw and unhidden. The survivors huddled near the frozen well. Emily shivered under a blanket, her eyes glassy with shock. Two other servants wept quietly, their voices raw from smoke. They looked to Sarah, though she had never asked for their trust, never sought to lead. But in the hollow of that morning, she stood taller than the house that once consumed them. From the wreckage, they dragged what little remained. A scorched locket, a twisted candlestick, Jonathan's journal, its edges black, but its ink still legible. William's boots, though not the man who wore them. Every object was a ghost, a reminder that the fire had not cleansed, it had only revealed. Sarah held the journal in her hands, its leather warm even hours after the blaze. She opened to the last page, the writing fractured but clear. "The silence is older than the fire. It will return." She read it aloud, her voice low, and the others drew closer, chilled by words more dangerous than smoke. For the fire had consumed flesh, timber, wealth, but not the silence. That silence still threaded the air, heavy, patient, unchanged. The house was gone, but what had nested within it remained, watching, waiting, as if it had only shed one skin to wear another. Sarah knew it then. The fire was not victory, it was invitation. She walked to the smoldering ruins, lifted a shard of glass from what had once been the grand mirror. Its surface was cracked, blackened, but deep within the fractures something moved, a flicker of eyes not her own. She dropped it back into the ash and stepped away, her pulse steady. Behind her, the servants clung to her presence as to warmth. To them, she was deliverance. To herself, she was only a witness. The Bertram estate was dead. But the wound it had carried was not.